Hey, what's up, everybody? Thanks for tuning in. I'm Matthew Ray. I have just spent the last couple hours learning and tuning and hacking Serato XML scripts. So I want to go over with you what I've learned and what I've done and how to make that happen and exactly what I've mapped on this controller and what is possible using some very, very basic remapping and just some information that I've collected from a couple articles on the internet. So, first things first, this is the controller I've mapped. I've only mapped the top section. I haven't really decided what I want to do with the rest of it yet, but I did know exactly what I wanted for the top section. The bottom one, I'm either going to use them as sample decks or for deck control C and D. I'm not sure yet on that. However, this is how deck A and B work. So on deck A, you can see here, that's these top 16 buttons. First of all, I've got cue points 1 through 4, 1, 2, 3, and 4. You'll notice that they are lit bright. And then if I hold the shift button, which is down here on the left, I can delete cue points 1, 2, 3, 4. I can set cue points 1, 2, 3, 4 and delete them as per. So that's how that top row works. The next row down, I have set to hot loops. So what I can do is I can set the short hot loops just like you can on any Serato controller, and I have these set to a specific value. I didn't want them shifting around left and right all over the place, so I just have them set to very specific values to these slots, and I can change those later if I want. Then if you hold shift, the same buttons will do this. It sets a 4-bar loop with the first button. The next two buttons will either half or double the loop accordingly. And then the last button exits the loop, okay? Then the third block down, I've got my beat jump controls. Beat jump is not something that a lot of people use in Serato, I guess, but I use it all the time. And so beat jump, the way that I have my beat jump set, I just wanted it to be real simple. I have either a 4-bar beat jump or a 16-bar beat jump. That's what these two buttons do. They set the beat jump either 4-bar or 16-bar, and then this is your forward and backward. So you can see right now I'm set to 16 and I'm jumping forward and backward 16, and right now I'm set to 4 and now I'm jumping forward and backward 4 beats. Okay, then this bottom row, I already mentioned that this is the shift button. All it does is shift those top two rows to control their alternate functions, both deleting cue points and running the different page of loops. So that's the shift button. Then right here, I've got my sync on and sync off. I use these kind of all the time to get in and out of stuff for transitions, so I wanted them quickly lit up bright so I could see what it was and then I could turn them off. And I do like them on 2 buttons, even though it's kind of a waste of a button. That's exactly how they're laid out on the CDJs, and I really like that layout. So I wanted to sync on, sync off, and just have it be good there. Then I have my play button, and this is just play pause. There are no shifted functions for any of the things in the bottom 2 rows. That's what I have mapped right now. But proof of concept, it works. You can map shifted functions. You can map hotcues to light up when they are lit, and then to unlight when they're not lit, and you can change values to get the color feedback to the controller that you want. Proof of concept, awesome. Now, the way that I did this, stick around because this is the technical part, is by editing the XML. So in Serato, if you click on this MIDI button and you MIDI map all the stuff you want to MIDI map, you can tell that this mapping has a bunch of stuff already mapped to it. All you do is click on something and then click on the button you want to map to it, and it creates that MIDI mapping. And then if you go over here and you go to your MIDI presets, you hit a new MIDI preset, and then you save all of the MIDI mappings you've done to that preset, you get an XML file. So inside of, on OS X, inside of your music, inside of your users, and then your music, your Serato folder, you have your MIDI folder, you have your XML files. And so this XML file is in here. So the way that I've mapped this is I've opened up, I started by opening up and copying and pasting and then taking some things from different sources on the internet to figure out exactly how I've done this. And I've opened them up in my text editor, which is Atom. Atom is an open source text editor that was recommended by a programmer friend of mine. I am not a programmer. I just ended up figuring this out, and it works. So the way that this works is Atom has each of these lines all collapsed. So it is a much easier way to see what's going on. But if you see in between this control and this control, there's 40 lines of code. And then, so this, we have about 10,000 lines of code in this thing. So 10,000, 1,000 lines of code. 1,000 lines of code. Anyway, so if I open up one of these, I'm going to start with something super basic, the play button, because nothing has changed. So the play button is number 51. You'll see on the right here, this tells me what which control I have this mapped to. And I have the Launchpad Programmer's Reference Guide that tells me numbers of each of the buttons. The Launchpad is numbered like this, 0 through 8, 16 through 24, 32 through 40, and so on. So it kind of goes down. And if you have a Launchpad or if you have a controller, the note number that it's sending out is the important information here. That's what's contained in this last thing. Then inside of each of these controls, and your text editor may not collapse things like this, but if you use Atom, and if you open up an XML file, it will collapse things like this just by clicking on this button over here. Then you can look at each of these. This is anything between this close control, so this bracket control is the end, and the beginning of the control is the control statement. All of this is for one function, one button. And that button is 16. Let's not go through that one. Let's find a simpler one. Play pause is 51, so let's find 51. Play pause on deck A is 51. So here it is. And what this does is this is Serato's default MIDI information, default MIDI code for what happens when you MIDI map something. The only thing I've edited inside of this control is the values, the output values, user IO output values for the colors to get my Launchpad to reflect green. So depending on your controller, you may have to go through, find out what MIDI values change the colors on the controller, the color feedback on the controller, and then change the specific values to that. Honestly, there's a lot inside of this code, and I don't understand it all. I just tested it, and all I had to do was change this value to get my play button, instead of lighting white and yellow, which is values 0 and 127 on the Launchpad, to light dim green, bright green. All I had to do was change these two values to the bright green, which is 60, and the dim green, which is 16 values for the Launchpad. So that's an example of how you simply edit this. Again, all I did was open up Midi in Serato. All I did was go to the Midi tab, click on this play button, and hit this button on my controller, and it spit out, and then save that to the XML file, and then it spit out this XML code between this control close and this control open, for that's what the play button does, and all I did was edit this. Okay, so that's a simple example of editing that. The next thing I had to step into was how to get a modifier to work. And I was only able to get a modifier to work, and let's look at the code for my modifier, which is 48. There it is. Okay. I was only able to get a modifier to work. User IO event output. Yes, I was only able to get a modifier to work by copying code from this DJ Tech Tools article about hacking Serato XMLs. The only issue with this is he does not have output for a modifier in his code. So I also had to go to where did I even find that? I don't even know how I found this anymore. Somehow I figured out how to do the output for the modifier, and I may have just guessed. I don't remember anymore. I just guessed, and I changed the number value out, and I messed around with it, and I finally got the output for my modifier 1. Why there are 2 in here, I don't know. What difference they make, I'm not sure, but it works. So, then, yeah, so this is just how I mapped the modifier. So that sets the modifier state of modifier 1 to on or off, basically. So when you hold the modifier, it lights up orange, and you'll notice that these are the same modifier. I could have made them different modifiers, but I didn't want to, because I like one shift button to control the whole shift button. And again, this is redundancy on this controller, but I don't mind that, because usually when I'm DJing, I like to do things with one hand on this controller. So I'll hit the shift button with my thumb, or the shift button with this thumb, and do what I need to do. Oh, I may map that to the same modifier now that I say that. Okay, getting ahead of myself. Next. In fact, let me show you how I would do that. This is a good example of this. If I wanted to add a shift button just like this to this button, which I'm going to go ahead and do now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this control, which is 52. It's control 52, so let's find that. 52. Here we go. And I'm going to copy this. Here, hold on. Let's open this up, and let's see everything it contains. So this is a shift button. I'm going to copy from the open control to the close control, and I'm going to put it into a different XML file in this editor. So this is just basic. There's nothing in here. This is not to run anything. This is just to edit text. So I put something, that way the tabs work correctly, but that's just so that the text editor knows that there's an extra line there and it's not a big deal. So now what I'm going to do is I want this to operate identically to the way it's operating now, but I'm just going to change the control value. So this button over here is 56. So we're going to type that in there, 56. And it's going to operate exactly the same. So I'm just going to copy it. I'm going to go back into my code here. I'm going to go to a new line at the end, and I'm going to paste it. And that's it. Then I'm going to save it. I'm going to go back over to Serato. I'm going to load my new preset. I didn't get any errors. Serato will show you at the bottom if there's errors when you're with your XML, and it's kind of a pain because there's no debugging to figure it out. You just kind of have to guess. Usually it's like a syntax error, like there's an extra enter somewhere or something. And now, as you'll notice, I have an extra shift button over here on the right. I'm going to keep that there because, like I said, I just thought of this. If I'm using my right hand, I want to be able to hit shift and hit all the buttons I need. If I'm using my left hand, I want to be able to hit shift. And if I'm doing deck B with my left hand, then I want to be able to hit shift here. Okay. So that's an example of how you would add a line of control to this mapping. So again, this is the whole mapping file saved. Now, let's look at specifically the cue points, the hotcues. So the hotcues I have, this is the first one, 0 is the first hotcue. By the way, these seem to be in an arbitrary order. I wish they were in order of control value. I think they're just in the order that you map stuff in Serato, but also it doesn't seem to always be the order you map stuff in Serato. So I'm not sure why these are in the order they're in. Once I've edited and copied them, at this point it doesn't matter because now the second half of this, starting at control 49, I guess, or 20, starting at control 20, this is deck B. So up here's deck A, down here's deck B. The other problem I'm having with this is I don't know how to add comments. Usually in a code, I would add lots of comments to know what's what and where it's going. I'm not sure in XML how to add comments, and I haven't looked it up, and I don't really care at this point, so I'm not going to bother with it because I don't want to screw it up. I just want it to work. Now, so let's look at a hotcue. So hotcue is a very complicated set of controls. In fact, can I exit out of this so we get just more screen? There it is. Okay, we won't be able to see it all. That's fine. So we're going to look through here. First thing I'm going to click on is this control. You'll notice it's underlined in blue, so it closes here. So this is one hotcue. This is all the code you need to run that. Inside of each case is what happens when your modifier is in a different state. So for example, in the first case, the modifier is set to on. So that means if I'm holding down the shift button, that's what happens in this case. In this case, the modifier is set to off. So this is what happens when the modifier is not being pressed, when the shift button is not being pressed. So let's go to the first case. If the modifier is being pressed, and that's the condition for the modifier, next line of code is user IO. event click. So this is if the button is hit. And remember, we've told it which button we're hitting, button 0. So it just what happens with button 0 when it clicks, then it cue point delete is what it sends. And this is a specific command that it sends Serato in order to delete the cue point. In that DJ Tech Tools article, it says there's a way to search through the hex files inside of the actual Serato app and find new commands. I was able to kind of find these from between the DJ Tech Tools article and between the posting, the forum post on Serato, on the Serato forum about this. I was able to pull just the commands I needed from that code and get this to work. So, user IO, here's the cue point delete, here's the translation. The translation is important because this is how you're pressing the button. When you have behavior set to explicit, it's just a button press. If you have behavior set to toggle, it does something else. It can toggle stuff on and off. So don't change that unless you know what you're doing or unless you're playing with it. Okay, so now we've got user IO, event click, user IO, okay, event output, cue point set. Cool. So inside of user IO, this is your input. This is what happens when you click. And then here's your output. And this is all the lighting output for the deck. And so cue point set is this. Deck set default, deck ID 0, slot ID 0. So deck ID is 0, meaning it's deck A. Slot ID is 0, meaning it's, I don't think there is any slot for a deck. I don't know. Basically, deck ID and slot ID change what happens. And so for example, the modifier has a deck ID, but I don't know why, because you can't change a deck in the modifier. But when you're talking about setting decks or doing something with a deck, you can change your deck ID. Your slot ID is what happens in, let's say, for example, you have a sample slot ID 1, 2, 3, 4. So if you have, I don't know what deck ID your sample thing is. There is code on how to trigger samples online. I just haven't dived into that yet, and I don't think I'm going to do that right now. So translation on any, because this is an output, so it doesn't matter what press is happening. On any, we're going to output the value for the color I wanted for on, the value for the color I wanted for off. That's for cue point set. And then cue point set, this is the same thing. And then this is a repetition of the code. I'm not sure why there's two. I don't understand, because this value doesn't make any sense. I'm kind of curious what happens if I just delete that second part, but it works and I don't want to. So I may save a different version and try it, whatever. Try to clean it up a little bit. Okay, so that is just for what happens when the case modifier 1 is value on, when you're holding the modifier. This is what happens, same thing, when you're holding the modifier off. So you can have a separate output for the lights when you hold the shift button. I don't have that right now. I don't know why. I didn't bother. Whatever. Probably could, probably should, whatever. The other thing I wanted to do is I wanted to play with mapping if you're holding the cue point, having it flash. But again, not there yet. It works. I'm not super picky about it. Okay. So anyway, that's how you map cue points. I will post this code in the description. So if anyone has a Launchpad, you can make your Launchpad do exactly this. Or you can copy, paste, edit, expand on what this is doing for yourself. Holy goodness, was this an evening of mind-boggling fun. The other things I've did, so to make shifted functions for other things, the process I used was if I wanted one button to do two things, what I would do is I would come into Serato and I would map two buttons to the two things I wanted the one button to do. So let's just say, for example, I'm going to go to Midi and I want this button on the bottom left to let's see. Okay. Let's use this as an actual example. So I'm going to have these arrows go up and down, and this arrow go left and this arrow go right. Cool? So I'm moving around with the arrows on the Launchpad, and now let's say I want these buttons up here to load to deck A and B, but if you hold Shift, I want them to unload A and B. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to map a different, so first of all, I'm going to map the button to load to deck and load to deck, so I can load to decks A and B with that. And then I'm going to map the buttons next to them to the eject for this deck and the eject for this deck. Cool? So what I've done is I've mapped 4 buttons to what I want 2 buttons to cover. So now I'll come over to my MIDI preset and I will save it. That's very important because then it saves to the text file. So now with Atom, I'm now reading this new text file, and I can collapse all of these, and there's usually some wonkiness when you're collapsing it, but sometimes not. There might be a way to do this automatically. I'm not sure how you would do it automatically. Maybe you just hold the Control or Shift as you click on one of them and it collapses all of them that are at the same tab level. I'm not sure. I don't really want to get into that right now. This just works, even though it's tedious. So we do have to see which controls those are. Oh, they're the control changes. Ooh, look at that. That's a new thing I haven't run into. We'll play with it. I'm sure it's the same. Okay. Holy goodness. Wow, really? There's a lot in here now. What happened? That added so much. Why did that add so much? And see, again, this is where they're in kind of an arbitrary order, and I'm not sure why. Notice all my control changes are now in a different order. Okay, so let's figure this out. What is this? User IO event click, load track. Deck set default. Deck ID slot 1. Okay, so this is loading into deck B. This is loading a track into deck B. Okay. This library scroll horizontal. Cool. So this is my arrows. So this is loading a deck into deck B. That's my library scroll. That's library scroll. That's library scroll. Oh, it's neat that you can have a curve to your acceleration when you hold the button. Okay, so 110 is my load to deck. I'm going to say 111 is probably... yeah, eject. Okay, so then it goes like this. This is control change 108, 109, 110, 111. Cool? So here's how this is going to work. I'm going to take the code from 108 because I want this to be a shifted function. Actually, before we go any further than that, I'm going to take one of my already existing shifted functions. Let's take, for example, a cue point. So cue point 0. And I'm going to copy the code inside of cue point 0 here. Okay? And I'm going to go into just a random text file. Again, this is a different XML that I just opened to test. And I have case condition 1. That's for modifier 1. And then here's the user IO for that. So I'm going to delete that. And then I have case condition value on. And here's the user IO for that. So what I've done is I've created 2 different sections to paste in the functions I want to happen. So I'm going to go back to my Launchpad code. And first of all, I'm going to change the control because I want this to be, so what did we decide? It was 108, 109, 110, 111. So 108, so we're going to close this one because it's just a hotcue modifier. So 109 is what I want. I want 109 to be the button I press. So here's what I'm telling Serato that I want this to be control change 109, and now I'm creating a shifted function. So now in here, I'm going to copy this user IO section. I'm going to actually cut it, And then I'm going to delete the rest of the control stuff because we don't need that anymore. And this is for when it's off, when the modifier's off. I want it to load the track, right? And we can see modifier 1 is off. I want it to load the track, deck 0. Then we're going to go into 108, which is here. And I'm going to copy the user IO section from here, delete the command for 109. I'm going to go back in here, and then we're going to paste that in here. So now we have the control that we want for control change 109 when shift is off and when shift is on. We've copied those two. So I'm going to take this, and I'm going to copy it. I'm going to paste it where the control for 108 was. Or where the control for 109 was. Again, I don't think it matters. This order seems to be arbitrary, so I'm not going to worry too much about that. Let's just run through that one more time real quick. So we're going to delete the user IO section inside of each of these conditions. Okay. Then we're going to take our, we're now mapping for button 110, right? So I'm going to take this. When it's off, it's going to go here. And actually, let's make sure we copy this before we delete it. Copy it. Delete that. And we're going to paste it here. Okay. And we're going to go into this Launchpad section here. And we're going to open 111, user IO. Copy that. And paste it here. Cool. So now, let's go in here. Let's delete this. All right. Now we're going to have our 110, and we're going to paste it right up here where it was. Copy from control. Right here. And it tabbed it weird, so we're just going to tab it back to where it should be. Okay. So now, everything should be fine with this. I'm going to hit Command S to save this file. I'm going to load it in Serato. Okay, no errors. It looks like it loaded fine. Let's test this right now. So right now, I should be able to move up and down my library. Oops, let's turn Midi off. I should be able to move up and down my library like this, which is fine. There's a little bit of a delay, and I'm not sure why. Okay, and then I should be able to load to deck B, load to deck A, and then if I hold shift, I should be able to eject both of those decks. Right? So that's how the mapping process works. That's how you can go about editing this. Now I'd like to talk a little bit discussions about ideally what would happen, ideally how this is going to work. Well, my ideal for what this would be like is like Traktor mapping. So I come from mapping in Traktor, using extreme mapping and using other things, and it seems like it wouldn't be difficult to write a program that wrote these commands. It also seems like it wouldn't be difficult to start to compile a list of these commands that are the most commonly used, the most important used, or just to have a library of these commands that just work. So if there's anyone out there who's interested in finding more of these commands and making a repository of them somewhere online so we can all have access to them, or if there's anyone interested in developing an app that would allow, that would give you a GUI to do this based on the repository of controls that we are looking to build, similar to extreme mapping for the Traktor mapping GUI, although that has a better mapping GUI than Serato to begin with, but similar to extreme mapping, except for creating Serato XMLs, let me know. I would be interested in that project, and I would like to see that go somewhere. So anyway, this is mapping in Serato. This is how this works. Thanks for watching.